I call Grant Robertson.
Mr Speaker, what a pathetic bid for the leadership of the ACT Party that was. I mean, if you're going to do it how Morris does it. There was only one person laughing after that, Judith Collins. No one else over there was laughing after that pathetic attempt. Mr Speaker, today I want to talk about a budget that has two deficits in it. A deficit of money and a deficit of ideas. And be very clear, Mr Speaker, Bill English, being the dipped-in version of Rip Van Winkle and waking from his 7-year slumber to suddenly decide that there's a problem with poverty and there's a problem with the housing crisis, doesn't make for a plan. It doesn't make for a real plan to grow the New Zealand economy. There is a complete deficit of ideas in here and indeed a deficit of money. And it's interesting, Mr Speaker, because when the government was challenged about the extent of their support, in this case for working families or for beneficiary families, Bill English was heard to say, well, something's better than nothing. That's it now, Mr Speaker. That's the extent of the aspiration of this national government. Something is better than nothing. That's as good as it gets for New Zealanders from now on with the national government. Something is better than nothing. The party that used to say they were ambitious for New Zealand has now resigned themselves to the ground of the micromanaging and the tinkering. Where are the opportunities for young New Zealanders to look at this budget and say, there's the chance for me to be a success. There's the chance for me to grow up in a regional town in New Zealand, get a job, raise my family there, buy a house. Where's that in this budget? All we saw was a budget with its eye firmly on one thing, Mr Speaker, the 2017 election and promising tax cuts. Because, mark my words, that's what this budget was about. Throw out $25 a week that by all means will be welcome in those households, but that's the build-up to 2017. The build-up to saying, once again, just as this national government did in 2010, put forward a package of tax cuts designed to bribe and win them an election rather than dealing with the social and economic problems that are in front of New Zealand today. It is irresponsible, Mr Speaker. It is a politician's budget, not a budget for the people of New Zealand. But if we take a look at the deficit of money in this budget, and let's be clear, Mr Speaker, yes, the National Party promised surpluses to New Zealand for 2014-15. They promised it at 2 elections, they promised it right throughout the last 4 or 5 years, and they have completely failed to deliver on that promise. But it's much worse than that, Mr Speaker, because what this budget does is kick the fiscal can down the road. Now, even in the optimistic scenario that Treasury put up for New Zealand, we will see growth halve on an annual basis from now through until 2019. Now, that growth today is built on the shaky foundations of milk, of selling houses in Auckland and of recovering from disaster. But even that, in the optimistic scenario, halves over the next period. Debt as a percentage of GDP, it peaks in 2016. But get this clear, not a single cent of the current $88 billion worth of debt will be paid off until 2019. That's the real casualty of failing to post a surplus, is the fact that future generations of New Zealanders are again being saddled by a national government with huge levels of debt. And that's in the optimistic scenario that Treasury are putting forward. We see exports remaining stagnant at about 27% of GDP in the most optimistic scenario. And then today, Mr Speaker, we hear that dairy exports are now 27% down compared to where they were last April. We've got the largest current account deficit in 6 years. These are the scenarios on which the National Party would say good times are ahead for New Zealand. But, Mr Speaker, if we look into the detail of the budget, look at what's called the downside scenario. Included in the downside scenario are commodity prices falling. And let's be realistic here, Mr Speaker. Everyone in the world is telling the national government dairy prices will continue to fall. Last year, Goldman Sachs put out a report that said there is a 5-year glut in milk products being supplied into the global market. Commodity prices will keep falling. It also says that there will be higher inflation. We have seen no evidence of that. The Reserve Bank Governor can't guarantee that. In that scenario, Mr Speaker, there'll be no surplus next year. There won't be a surplus until 2018 in that scenario. There won't be any debt paid back before 2019, and in fact the percentage of debt as a percentage of GDP will be 26%, miles away from where they are now. The current account deficit hit 7.7% of GDP in 2016-17 under that scenario. Mr. Speaker, the numbers in this budget are clear. The economy is standing still in the best scenario and going backwards in the worst scenario, and that is the economic legacy of Bill English and John Key, kicking the fiscal can down the road. And they made promises to New Zealand that wages would grow up by $7,000 and that unemployment, there would be 140,000 more jobs. They made that promise last year to happen in 2017. And what they do in this budget, in the most optimistic of scenarios, is kick the can down the road to 2019. It's always jam tomorrow with Bill English. We're always on the cusp of something special. And the only something special in the National Party is Nick Smith, and he's very special indeed, Mr. Speaker. We're always on the cusp of something special with Bill English, and it never comes. And they like to crow about being the great economic managers, Mr. Speaker. Well, the reality is 7 budgets, 7 deficits, no debt being paid back, exports flatlining. There is no real growth, sustainable growth in this economy going forward for New Zealand under the settings of this government, Mr. Speaker. And it's all done in a sacrifice at the altar of tax cuts in 2017. That is irresponsible government, Mr. Speaker. That is irresponsible management of the New Zealand economy. So what should the government have been doing in this budget? Well, they should have been investing in the regions of New Zealand, Mr. Speaker, and no doubt someone on the government side will get up and they will tell us, no, there's a great initiative in there. There are the regional research institutes. Well, to start with, there's only 3 of them. And it may have escaped members on the other side, but there are more than 3 regions. And the other thing is the amount of money for them is pitiful. And Mr. Speaker, what it typifies is an approach to economic development driven by Stephen Joyce. We don't want to see more money going to Stephen Joyce's mates who he talks to in the Koru Club. What we want to see is real investment in the regions, making sure that we get alongside all of regional New Zealand, build on the strengths. I was in Gisborne last week. There are people there doing amazing, innovative things in engineering and adding value to wood products. They need to be backed by a government, and that's what the Labor government will do after 2017. Not pick winners out of Stephen Joyce's Rolodex, not make Stephen Joyce in charge of economic development who thinks it's a big night at Sky City on the pokies, but real economic development in our regions, and that was shockingly absent from this budget. Also shockingly absent from this budget was a proper plan to diversify the New Zealand economy. How long will this government go on believing that they can simply supply one product to one big customer and think that that's a proper strategy for the New Zealand economy? We must have real initiatives to add value, and they were absent from this budget, Mr. Speaker. And then there's the housing crisis, where Bill English's solution is to come up with a tax that won't work, that he's acknowledged himself, and a housing program that Nick Smith's admitted today won't even build a fraction of the houses that have been promised in Auckland. The failure of this government to deal with the housing crisis in New Zealand was emphasised, Mr. Speaker, by the fact that the budget documents didn't even contain most of the housing initiatives because it was such a panicked, last-minute reaction to being told off by the Reserve Bank Governor. Mr. Speaker, the biggest deficit in this budget is not actually the deficit in the finances. It's the deficit of ideas, it's the deficit of hope, and the deficit of opportunity for New Zealanders. A young New Zealander today with the world at their feet looking at this budget will be asking themselves, what is here in New Zealand for me? What future is here? New Zealanders deserve far, far better than a budget that focuses so much on micro issues, that's so much about political management, that breaks every promise that has been made. New Zealanders deserve far better than this budget, Mr. Speaker, and they will get it after 2017 with a Labor government.